Hey guys, this is Justin. Hello and welcome to another video over here on EcksToo. We're continuing our coverage of Halo Infinite with a look at things that I wish I had known before playing the game on Legendary. I've now done 2 playthroughs, one on Heroic and one on Legendary. Halo Infinite's Legendary is not the hardest in the series, but it is a fairly big jump over Heroic, so I'll be sharing some strategies that are pretty much must use in my opinion. Unfortunately, not all of this footage is from my Legendary playthrough. Some of it is Heroic, that's just due to hard drive limitations. And by the way guys, this video has no spoilers for the campaign, the story, or anything, although I will be discussing some boss mechanics at the end. I'll make sure to give you a good warning before I go into that though. But let's get started. The first big tip is related to hunters. Hunters in Halo Infinite are nearly as difficult as bosses. What's more, the strategy of old, i.e. play them up close, use the dodge, and take advantage of their weak points, isn't nearly as effective. Hunters are much more willing to simply fire their cannon and don't easily telegraph their melees as they did in the past. That being said, there are still some strategies that work very well against them. First of all, even on Legendary, the skewer is an excellent weapon and you can fight them head on. The hunter's biggest weak spot in this game, in my opinion, is their knees. Between the skewer and the canisters usually littering the battlefield, you'll usually be able to take one out pretty quickly, then play conservatively and try to take down the second. Another really great weapon against hunters is the Needler. For some reason, regardless of where the Needler hits on the hunter, it will super combine, and you can use that to get some really good consistent damage. There will usually also be Needlers around the battlefield because you'll typically have fought through Covenant to get through the hunters, or Banished rather. Alright, my second major tip will be use your forward operating bases. I was really stubborn about this on my Heroic playthrough, which I'm probably showing you on screen right now. I'm going to avoid spoilers in this video as much as possible, but there is one mission where you have to visit 4 different towers. Each one of these towers is conveniently located near a forward operating base. There's no reason why you shouldn't, at the very least, get some Marines to join you on the fight, but if you've also been doing open world activities, you'll most likely be able to take in a Scorpion or some heavy armor to make the experience much easier. On Legendary, pretty much any level where I could start from the open world, I would at least stock up on ammunition, but also usually take some armor and some Marines with me. My third tip is a small one, and that's to really use the special weapons that you'll gain throughout the campaign. You gain weapon variants either by collecting Valor or by defeating high value targets, and some of these are real game changers. I think a really good loadout for this game is a battle rifle plus one of the ordinary ammo using special weapons. So although the explosive skewer is great, it's going to be very hard to find ammunition for it throughout the battlefield, especially because it doesn't take regular skewer ammo and Legendary ammo crates aren't very common. On the other hand, something like the Calcite Destroyer, which is in my opinion pretty much a power weapon even on Legendary, just uses basic electrical ammo. So as long as you can find the ordinary ammo crates, which for most of the later levels at least will not be a problem, the weapon is worth slotting into a second inventory slot. However, if you do find that you're running out of ammo, another absolutely excellent weapon that I definitely overlooked in my Heroic playthrough is the Sentinel Beam. The Sentinel Beam will tear through even the best and most powerful enemies. Brute Chieftains will fall to this thing relatively quickly. What's more, the Sentinel Beam can be replenished not only by the hard light canisters, but also of course by the Sentinel weapons, which will drop quite frequently on the difficult levels. One final note on this topic is that there are points, and again I won't spoil anything, where you will be going on several missions in a row without returning to the open world. So it's very important, even if you think it's going to be a quick mission, to stop by the outpost, get any weapon you want before moving forward. My next tip is about general battlefield management. Legendary is significantly more difficult than Heroic, and I think the main source of the difficulty actually comes not from enemy HP, which to me doesn't feel like it's overly buffed, but rather the damage output. On lower difficulties, the grapple shot can be used to aggressively pursue enemies, and that's not really the case on Legendary. When I entered the battle, I typically had several things that I did, pretty much a routine. First of all, I would fire the map revealing equipment, and I also upgraded it so it also showed enemy health. This was especially useful for hunters, but I also found really nice throughout the battlefield. Then I would engage enemies from long range as long as I could with my battle rifle, and when I started to feel pressure, I would pop my deployable cover. In my opinion, except for the grappling hook maybe, deployable cover is the most useful piece of equipment in Halo Halo Infinite. If I were to upgrade things, what I'd probably do, upgrade the grapple shot to the point where it gets the electrical stun, upgrade my shield probably 2 bits, and then put as many points as I could into the drop shield. The point where you get the extra electrical damage especially is amazing. You can start arcing damage between enemies. It helps thin out enemies which are close together. It's just an invaluable ability, especially when combined with quick firing weapons like the battle rifle. I personally don't find the thrusters very useful. If you're up close enough to be really engaging in combat like that on Legendary, you're probably not long for the world anyway, so I usually use the grappling hook, for example, when I really need to create distance between me and my enemies, or where there were 1 or 2 enemies that I would hit with the electrical charge to weaken and finish off. But just generally, I stayed very defensive, got the lay of the land with my beacons, used the drop shield to pick off enemies, and if I needed to, reposition with the grappling hook. Just to sort of continue on this point, if you've played Legendary or even maybe Heroic in a past Halo game, you're probably already familiar with this, but you do have to position yourself differently when you're playing harder difficulties in Infinite. You cannot go in the center of the battlefield. It's almost like multiplayer in a way. Keep your back to something solid. Absolutely do not put yourself between multiple groups of enemies, and you also have to be ready for things like the Phantom, which will absolutely annihilate you in this game. The Phantom on Legendary is no joke. Just like in multiplayer, when you're in battle, you probably shouldn't be sprinting very much unless you're running to cover or to a specific position. Use your equipment. It's absolutely vital on Legendary, and I covered that in the prior video, but just briefly, you should know your equipment shortcuts. Me personally, I choose 3. I treat my grappling hook like default. I know that that's right equipment. I know that my shield has a long recharge time, but is very, very useful, especially when I'm in dire situations. So I know that's left equipment, and sometimes I'll keep that primed as it's recharging. Then I also know that I can throw in my thrusters, or much more commonly my scanner, wherever needed. When it came to grenades, the only ones that I kept in memory were the frag grenades, which is sort of the default position, I believe, left and left, and also the shock grenades. I find that everything else can basically be exchanged. I wasn't purposely trying to stick enemies too frequently, except for bosses, but the shock grenades have a lot of extra utility. For one, you can use them to disable enemy vehicles, but also they're really effective against enemies in large groups, especially sentinels. Alright, my last tip is sort of a combined one. I want to talk about boss fights, and again, without spoilers, although I will have a technique for the final boss which you may not want to know, and also checkpoints. So checkpoints in Halo Infinite are very important in long battles, and that's especially true if you're doing a lasso run, because there's no Iron Skull in this game, at least as far as I know. And just like in prior Halos, you're more likely to get a checkpoint if you're not firing and away from battle. Now, there are also cases where boss fights sort of have built-in checkpoints, but you have to make sure you're in a safe position so that they register. When fighting a hunter, for example, the game is actually quite likely to give you a checkpoint after you kill the first one. However, sometimes you need to get away from the battle. So if you've killed one hunter and you are thinking you might have difficulty with the second, or you're getting frustrated, consider just backing up, killing any enemy who might be around you, and getting that checkpoint. Usually you will get one, sometimes multiple. The same is true with bosses, and I'm going to talk a little bit about some boss mechanics here, so if you don't want to get spoiled in that regard, you might just want to end the video. But bosses will often come in stages, or you'll need to destroy things around the arena. Usually once you do this, you will get a checkpoint. The last boss especially, those checkpoints are key because it will destroy you. On Legendary, even with the drop wall, the last boss can very easily be a one-shot kill. So getting those checkpoints is key, especially where there are usually waves involved. It can be a very, very long process. Bosses on Legendary are by far the most difficult part of the game alongside the hunters. Usually the environment will present some opportunities. As with the hunter, needlers are pretty useful. They super combine and do a lot of guaranteed damage, but generally in boss fights, your best ability will be speed. Most of the bosses can one-hit you with a melee weapon, but it is a bit of a difficult game to play because many of them also have shields, and the shields can recharge if you're not doing consistent damage. One final tip, and this is about the last boss especially, so click away if you don't want to hear it. I'll give you a second. They will be absolutely destroyed by the energy sword. There are several stages, and you can get through each one in, I think, 3 swipes with the sword. So very, very doable, and there's actually sword ammo throughout the arena. But guys, those are my Legendary tips for Halo Infinite. I hope you enjoyed this video. Have you beat Halo Infinite on Legendary? If so, how does it compare with prior games? Let me know that and more down in the description. For me, I think this Legendary actually walked a very good line between difficulty and cheesiness. Halo 2, for example, is very difficult, but it's difficult to the point where it's not fun, especially with the Jackal snipers, which are very high on the cheesy scale. Halo 4 is also very difficult, but a lot of that is through ammo scarcity, which that game really suffers from, and really bullet spongy enemies. Halo 3 is a bit too easy. Halo CE for me has always been pretty much perfect, and this game is probably second in terms of legendary balancing from my perspective. But that's all I have for today. Be safe, and may the Force be with you.